Kill a Mockingbird, Reader's Digest version, Chapter 8. Mr. Arthur, honey, said Atticus, gently correcting me. Jean Louise, this is Mr. Arthur Radley. I believe he already knows you. Mr. Heck Tate, looking intently at Boo, was about to speak when Dr. Reynolds came in the door. Everybody out, he said. Evening, Arthur. Didn't notice you the first time I was here. Said Atticus, glancing at Boo. Heck, let's all go out on the front porch. I wondered why he was inviting us to the front porch instead of the living room. Then I understood. The living room lights were awfully strong. We started to file out. Come along, Mr. Arthur, I heard myself saying. You don't know the house real well. I'll just take you to the porch, sir. He looked down at me and nodded. Feeling slightly unreal, I led him to the chair farthest from Atticus and Mr. Tate. It was in deep shadow. Atticus sat in the swing and Mr. Tate in the chair next to him. I sat beside Boo. Well, heck, Atticus was saying, I guess the thing to do... Good Lord. Atticus pushed up his glasses and pressed his fingers to his eyes. Jim's only 13. Anyway, it'll come before the county court. What will, Mr. Finch? Mr. Tate leaned forward. Well, of course, it was clear-cut self-defense, but... Mr. Finch, do you think Jim killed Bob Ewell? Well, you heard what Scout said. She said Jim yanked him off her. He probably got hold of Ewell's knife somehow in the dark. Mr. Finch, hold on. Jim never stabbed Bob Ewell. Atticus shook his head. Heck, it's mighty kind of you, but nobody's hushing this up. I don't live that way, and I haven't raised Jim to. Nobody's going to hush anything up, Mr. Tate said. Bob Ewell fell on his knife. He killed himself. I can prove it. He'd flung Jim down. He stumbled over a root under that tree and... Look. Mr. Tate stood up, reached in his side pocket, and drew out a long switchblade knife. As he did so, Dr. Reynolds came to the door. The deceased under that tree, Doctor, Mr. Tate said, just inside the schoolyard. Got a flashlight? Better have this one. Dr. Reynolds took Mr. Tate's flashlight. Jim's all right. He won't wake up tonight. That the knife that killed him, Heck? No, sir. It's still in him. Looked like a kitchen knife from the handle. Ken ought to be there with the hearse by now, Doctor. Night. Mr. Tate flicked open the knife. It was like this, he said. He held the knife and pretended to stumble. See there? His whole weight drove it in. He closed the knife. Scout's 8 years old. She was too scared to know exactly what went on. You'd be surprised, Atticus said grimly. I won't have it. Damn it, I'm not worrying about Jim. Mr. Tate's boot hit the floorboard so hard the light in Miss Maudie's bedroom went on. Miss Stephanie Crawford's light went on. Atticus and Mr. Tate looked across the street, then at each other. They waited. When Mr. Tate spoke again, his voice was barely audible. Mr. Finch, you've been under a strain tonight, and for once you haven't been able to put two and two together. No boy Jim's size with a busted arm would have had enough fight left in him to tackle and kill a grown man in the pitch dark. Heck, said Atticus abruptly. That was a switchblade you were waving. Where'd you get it? Took it off a drunk man, Mr. Tate answered coolly. I was trying to remember. Mr. Ewell was on me, then he went down. Jim must have gotten up. At least I thought. Heck, Atticus said. I said I took it off a drunk man downtown tonight. Ewell probably found that kitchen knife in the dump somewhere, honed it down and bided his time. Atticus made his way to the swing and sat down. His hands dangled limply between his knees. He was looking at the floor. Mr. Tate clumped softly around the porch. It ain't your decision, Mr. Finch. It's all mine. My decision and my responsibility. Your boy never stabbed Bob Ewell, and now you know it. Mr. Tate stopped pacing. He stopped in front of Atticus. I'm not a very good man, sir, but I am sheriff of Macomb County. Know everything that's happened here since before I was born. There's a black boy dead for no reason, and the man responsible for it's dead. Let the dead bury the dead this time, Mr. Finch. Mr. Tate went to the swing and picked up his hat and put it on. I've never heard tell it's against the law for a citizen to do his utmost to prevent a crime from being committed, which is exactly what happened. Maybe you'll say it's my duty to tell the town all about it, but to my way of thinking, Mr. Finch, taking the man who's done you and this town a great service and dragging him with his shy ways into the limelight, to me, that's a sin. It's a sin I'm not about to have on my head. If it was any other man, it'd be different, but not this man, Mr. Finch. Mr. Tate massaged his left arm. I may not be much, Mr. Finch, but I'm still sheriff of Macomb County. As far as I'm concerned, Bob Ewell fell on his knife. Good night, sir. Mr. Tate stamped off the porch and strode across the front yard. His car door slammed, and he drove away. Atticus sat looking at the floor for a long time. Finally, he raised his head. Scout, he said, Mr. Ewell fell on his knife. Can you possibly understand? Atticus looked like he needed cheering up. I ran to him and hugged him. Yes, sir, I understand. Mr. Tate was right. Atticus disengaged himself and looked at me. What do you mean? Well, it'd be sort of like killing a mockingbird, wouldn't it? Atticus put his face in my hair and rubbed it. When he got up and walked across the porch, his youthful step had returned. Before he went inside the house, he stopped in front of Boo Radley. Thank you for my children, Arthur, he said. When Boo Radley shuffled to his feet, light from the living room windows glistened on his forehead. Every move he had made was uncertain, as if he were not sure his hands and feet could make proper contact with the things he touched. He coughed his dreadful railing cough and was so shaken he had to sit down again. His hand searched for his hip pocket, and he pulled out a handkerchief. He wiped his forehead. I found it incredible that he had been sitting beside me all this time. He had not made a sound. Once more, he got to his feet. He turned to me and nodded toward the front door. You'd like to say goodnight to Jim, wouldn't you, Mr. Arthur? Come right in. I led him down the hall to the bedroom. There I took him by the hand, a hand surprisingly warm, and he allowed me to lead him to Jim's bed. Dr. Reynolds had made a tent-like arrangement over Jim's arm to keep the covers off. Boo leaned forward and looked over it. An expression of timid curiosity was on his face, as though he had never seen a boy before. His hand came up, but he let it drop to his side. You could pat him, Mr. Arthur. He's asleep. Boo's hand hovered over Jim's head and came down lightly on Jim's hair. Then his hand tightened on mine, and he indicated that he wanted to leave. I led him back to the front porch, where his uneasy steps halted. He was still holding my hand, and he gave no sign of letting me go. Will you take me home? He almost whispered it, in the voice of a child afraid of the dark. I put my foot on the top step and stopped. Mr. Arthur, bend your arm down here like that. That's right, sir. I slipped my hand into the crook of his arm. He had to stoop a little to accommodate me, but if Miss Stephanie Crawford was watching from her upstairs window, she would see Arthur Radley escorting me down the sidewalk, as any gentleman would do. We came to the street light on the corner, and I wondered how many times Dill and Jim and I had made this journey. I entered the Radley front gate for the second time in my life. Boo and I walked up the steps to the porch. His fingers found the front doorknob. He gently released my hand, opened the door, went inside, and shut the door behind him. I never saw him again. Neighbors bring food with death and flowers with sickness and little things in between. Boo was our neighbor. He gave us 2 soap dolls, a broken watch, a pair of good luck pennies, and our lives. But neighbors give in return. We never put back into the tree what we took out of it. We had given him nothing. It made me sad. I turned to go home. Street lights winked down the street all the way to town. I had never seen our neighborhood from this angle. There were Miss Maudie's, Miss Stephanie's. There was our house. I could see the porch swing. In daylight, I thought, you could see to the post office corner. Daylight. In my mind, the night faded. It was daytime and the neighborhood was busy. Miss Stephanie Crawford crossed the street to tell the latest to Miss Rachel. Miss Maudie bent over her azaleas. It was summertime, and 2 children scampered down the sidewalk toward a man approaching in the distance. The man waved, and the children raced each other to him. It was still summertime, and the children came closer. A boy trudged down the sidewalk, dragging a fishing pole behind him. A man stood waiting with his hands on his hips. Summertime, and his children played in the front yard with their friend, enacting a strange little drama of their own invention. It was fall, and his children trotted to and fro around the corner, the day's woes and triumphs on their faces. They stopped at an oak tree, delighted, puzzled, apprehensive. Winter and his children shivered at the front gate, silhouetted against a blazing house. Summer, and the man watched his children's hearts break. Autumn again, and Boo's children needed him. Atticus had said, "You never really know a man until you stand in his shoes. Just standing on the Radley porch was enough." The streetlights were fuzzy from the fine rain that was now falling. As I made my way home, I felt very old, but when I looked at the tip of my nose, I could see fine, misty beads. But looking cross-eyed made me dizzy, so I quit. As I made my way home, I thought, what a thing to tell Jim tomorrow. He'd be so mad he missed it. He wouldn't speak to me for days. As I made my way home, I thought Jim and I would get grown, but there wasn't much else left for us to learn, except possibly algebra. I ran up the steps and into the house. Atticus was sitting by Jim's bed, reading. "Is Jim awake yet?" "Sleeping peacefully. He won't be awake until morning. Go to bed, Scout. You've had a long day." "Well, I think I'll stay with you for a while." "Suit yourself," said Atticus. It must have been after midnight, and I was puzzled by his amiable acquiescence. He was shrewder than I, however. The moment I sat down, I began to feel sleepy. "What you reading?" I asked. Something of Jim's. The Gray Ghost." "Read it out loud, please, Atticus. It's real scary." "No," he said. "You've had enough scaring for a while." "Well, Atticus, I wasn't scared." He raised his eyebrows. Leastways, not till I started telling Mr. Tate about it." Atticus opened his mouth to say something, but shut it again. He turned his back to the first page of the book. I moved over and leaned my head against his knee. He said, "The Gray Ghost" by Secretary Hawkins, Chapter 1. I willed myself to stay awake, but the room was so warm and his voice was so deep and his knee was so snug that I slept. Seconds later, it seemed, he was gently lifting me to my feet and walking me to my room. "I heard every word you said," I muttered. "It's about a ship and Three-Fingered Fred and Stoner's boy." He unhooked my overalls, leaned me against him, pulled them off, and reached for my pajamas. "Yeah, and they all thought it was Stoner's boy messing up their clubhouse." He guided me to the bed and put me under the cover. "And they chased him and never could catch him because they didn't know what he looked like. And Atticus, when they finally saw him, why, he hadn't done any of those things. Atticus, he was real nice." His hands were under my chin, pulling up the cover, tucking it around me. "Most people are, Scout, when you finally see them." He turned out the light and went into Jim's room. He would be there all night, and he would be there when Jim waked up in the morning.